The market on the outpost was always crowded. Ships came and went, traders shouted prices, and the smell of strange foods mixed with smoke from the cooking stalls. Lights flickered above the metal pathways, and the voices of dozens of different species filled the air. Rian walked slowly through the noise, carrying a small pack over his shoulder. He was not rich, not powerful, but he was strong enough to survive the hard life of the outpost. He had come to trade tools he had fixed from old scrap, hoping to earn enough for his next trip. But as he moved through the market, something caught his attention. At the far side, near the shadow of a broken light, a young alien woman sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked different from the others, quiet, almost invisible among the chaos. Her clothes were old and torn, the fabric thin from wear. She did not call out like the sellers did. She did not beg loudly like some of the poor. She only sat there, her eyes searching the crowd as if she hoped someone might notice her. Ryan slowed his steps. Something about her made him stop. She looked too thin, her face pale, and her hands trembling as if she had not eaten for days. He stepped closer. The girl lifted her head and met his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice so soft he almost missed it, she whispered, "All I have are my clothes." Her words were almost lost under the noise of the market, but Ryan heard them clearly. The way she said it carried a weight heavier than the words themselves. He looked at her torn dress. She was clutching it tightly, as if afraid it would be taken from her. The meaning of her whisper was clear. She had nothing left, no food, no money, no belongings. Only the clothes on her body. Ryan's chest tightened. He had seen many desperate people in the outpost before. Some begged, some stole, some disappeared into the dark alleys never to return. But there was something in her eyes, something fragile yet strong, that held him there. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her lips trembling. "Nira." He nodded slowly. "I'm Rian." For a moment, the noise of the market faded around them. Rian crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. "How long since you ate?" Her eyes lowered to the ground. She didn't answer at first, but then she whispered, 3 days. Ryan took a slow breath. He could see the shame on her face. She wasn't begging him. She wasn't even asking for help. She was just admitting the truth, as if the words themselves were painful. "Wait here," he said. He moved quickly to a nearby food stall where a gruff seller was handing out bowls of hot grain stew. Ryan pulled a few coins from his pouch. Coins he had planned to use for his own dinner later, and bought 2 bowls. The seller gave him a strange look. "For both of you?" "Yes," Ryan said simply. Carrying the bowls back, he set one in front of Nira. The smell of warm food reached her, and her eyes widened. Her hands shook as she wrapped her fingers around the bowl. "You don't have to," she began, her voice breaking. "I want to," Ryan said. "Eat." For a long moment, she only stared at him, her lips pressing together as if she might cry. Then slowly, she began to eat. At first, she took small bites, as if afraid the food might vanish. But soon hunger took over, and she ate quickly, her thin hands gripping the bowl tightly. Rian ate his own stew more slowly, keeping his eyes on her. He noticed the way she hunched over, trying to hide from the stares of others. He noticed how her eyes darted toward passing traders, fear flickering there whenever someone came too close. When she finally set the empty bowl down, she let out a shaky breath. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" Ryan shrugged lightly. "Because you needed help." Her gaze met his again. There was disbelief in her eyes, as if she couldn't understand how a stranger would do this for her. "No one here helps," she whispered. "Not without taking something in return." Ryan thought about that. He had lived on the outpost long, enough to know she was right. Here, nothing was free. People took advantage of the weak. It was the way of survival. But he couldn't look at her and just walk away. "I don't want anything from you," he said firmly. She blinked, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "Nothing?" "Nothing," he repeated. For the first time, a hint of relief softened her face. She pulled her torn cloak tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from the whole world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Ryan gave a small nod. "You don't need to thank me. Just stay close for now. This place isn't safe for someone alone." Nira hesitated, then slowly nodded. As the two of them sat together, Ryan felt the weight of watching eyes from across the market. Other traders had noticed. Some looked at him with confusion. Others whispered, shaking their heads. A human helping someone for nothing. It was not normal here. But Ryan didn't care. He only knew one thing. He couldn't let Nira face this world alone. And though neither of them could see it yet, this moment was the beginning of something that would change both their lives. The market slowly grew quieter as the artificial lights dimmed, marking the end of the trading day. Vendors packed up their goods, their shouts replaced by the scrape of crates and the hum of closing stalls. The once busy pathways now echoed, with only a few tired footsteps. Rian and Nira still sat at the edge of the marketplace, near the broken light that buzzed faintly above them. She held her cloak tightly around her thin body, as if afraid the world might take it away at any moment. For a long while they didn't speak. Ryan could see she was exhausted. Her eyes were half closed, her head tilting slightly as though sleep might overtake her at any moment. But each time a stranger walked past, she opened her eyes again, sharp with fear. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "You said all you had were your clothes." Nira's fingers tightened around the cloth at her shoulders. Her lips trembled before she answered. "It's true. I have nothing else. No credits, no belongings, no place to stay." She lowered her head. "Not even a family anymore." Ryan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. "What happened?" At first she said nothing. Her face turned away, her eyes watching the ground. Then, in a voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear, she began to speak. "My world was taken," she whispered. "The raiders came without warning. They burned the farms, the homes. They captured many of us. I was one of them." Ryan stayed quiet, letting her continue at her own pace. "They forced us to work," she said, her voice shaking. "In the mines, in the markets. Some were sold, some disappeared. I escaped only because another prisoner distracted the guards. I ran until my feet bled. A ship captain let me hide in his cargo, but he left me here. He said I was too much trouble to keep." She laughed bitterly, though no joy was in it. "Since then, I've survived only because of the clothes I wear. I patch them, I guard them, because if I lose them—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Then I will truly have nothing." Ryan looked at her torn dress again, understanding now why she held it so tightly. It wasn't just fabric. It was the last piece of her identity, her last barrier against being stripped of her dignity. She turned her face toward him suddenly, her eyes wet but fierce. "Do you know what I almost did today?" He shook his head slowly. "I was going to give them away," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Trade them for food, for one more day of life." She lowered her gaze, shame burning in her cheeks. "But if I did that, I would not have been a person anymore. I would have been less than nothing." Ryan's heart clenched. He had seen despair before, but never spoken so clearly. He realized how close she had been to losing herself completely. "You don't have to do that," he said firmly. She gave a small, tired smile. "You say that. But tomorrow, when hunger comes again, When no one else offers kindness? Her voice grew softer. What then, Ryan? He had no easy answer. Life on the outpost was cruel. Most people only cared for themselves. Helping another often meant risking your own survival. Yet looking at her now, Ryan knew he couldn't just walk away. You'll have me, he said at last. Her eyes widened slightly. Why? Because you deserve more than this, he said. Because no one should have to choose between dignity and survival. For a moment, she only stared at him. Then slowly, her lips pressed together as if she were holding back tears. She turned her head, wiping at her eyes quickly before he could see. The market grew quiet around them. A cool wind drifted through the metal walkways, carrying the faint scent of burning fuel from the docking bays. Nira shivered under her thin cloak. You're cold, Ryan said. He slid off his pack and pulled out a worn jacket. It wasn't much, patched in places and a little too big for her, but it was warm. He held it out. Here. She looked at the jacket, then at him. You'll need it. I'll be fine, he replied. Slowly, she reached out and took it. When she pulled it around her shoulders, her hands trembled. No one has given me something without asking for something back, she whispered. Well, Ryan said with a small smile, then today's the first time. For the first time since he met her, she let out a soft laugh. It was faint, almost hidden, but it lit her tired face for a brief moment. They sat together a while longer, watching the last of the traders close their stalls. The market was nearly empty now, the shadows stretching longer under the dim lights. Ryan glanced around, noticing a few men in dark coats watching from the far side. Their eyes lingered too long on Nira. He leaned closer. We can't stay here. Do you have somewhere safe to sleep? Nira shook her head slowly. I usually find a corner, near the docks, but it's not safe. Ryan frowned. Then you'll come with me? Her eyes widened again. I shouldn't. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You're a person, and people deserve to be safe. She hesitated, her hands gripping the jacket he had given her. Finally, she nodded. Together, they stood. Ryan adjusted his pack, keeping an eye on the men still watching them. He placed a steady hand near Nira's shoulder, not touching, but close enough to guide her. As they walked out of the market, Nira whispered, I don't understand. You, Ryan. He glanced at her. What do you mean? Everyone else here looks at me like I'm nothing. But you treat me like I still matter. Ryan looked ahead, his voice calm. That's because you do matter. Nira lowered her head, her eyes glistening. For the first time in many dark days, a small spark of hope lit inside her chest. But neither of them noticed that the men in dark coats had begun to follow. The metal walkway echoed under Ryan's boots as he guided Nira away from the market. The outpost had grown quieter now that night had settled in. The overhead lights flickered weakly, and the hum of engines from the docking bays filled the air. Far above, a clear panel of reinforced glass showed the dark stretch of space and the distant stars. Nira walked close to him, clutching the jacket he had given her. She glanced behind them several times, her eyes nervous. Are we being followed? She whispered. Ryan didn't look back, but his jaw tightened. Maybe. Don't worry, just stay near me. Her steps quickened. It's the raiders, isn't it? Ryan gave her a quick look. You've seen them before? She nodded slowly. I know their faces. They used to guard the cages. Her voice lowered. If they've seen me, they won't stop. Ryan thought quickly. The room he rented was small, barely more than a bunk with a locked door. It wasn't much, but it would keep her safe for tonight. Come on, he said. My place is close. They turned down a narrow hallway between metal walls streaked with rust. A broken light flickered overhead, casting long shadows. Ryan listened, carefully to the sound of footsteps behind them. When he was sure the men were still following, he led Nira through a side path and into a crowded section of the docks. The noise and movement of people unloading cargo gave them some cover at all. Last, they reached a tall metal door. Ryan keyed in a code, and it slid open with a hiss. He stepped aside to let Nira enter first. The room inside was small and plain, a single bunk against one wall, a desk with scattered tools, and a small heater that hummed softly. It wasn't much, but compared to the cold streets outside, it felt like a haven. Nira stepped in cautiously, her eyes scanning every corner. She stood in the middle of the room, holding the jacket close, as if unsure if she belonged there. "You can sit," Ryan said gently. He set his pack down on the desk. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bunk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The silence stretched between them for a moment. Finally, she looked up. "Why are you doing this, Ryan? You barely know me." Ryan sat on the chair by the desk, leaning forward slightly. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing. Maybe not the same way as you, but I've been there. And I know how much a little kindness can mean." Her eyes softened, but still carried doubt. "Most people here wouldn't give kindness. They'd take advantage. Why risk yourself?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone has to." Nira lowered her gaze again. She looked around the small room. "You don't have much either." "Enough to share," he replied simply. She was quiet for a long time, as though struggling to decide if she could believe his words. At last, she whispered, "I almost gave up today. I thought there was no one left who cared if I lived or died." Ryan leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "Well, you were wrong." The corner of her lips twitched, almost a smile. Ryan stood and moved to a small storage box in the corner. He pulled out some dried ration packs and a metal flask of water. Placing them on the desk, he said, "These aren't much, but they'll keep us fed tomorrow." Nira's eyes widened. "You mean us?" "Yes. You're not alone anymore." Her hands trembled slightly on her lap. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Ryan said. "Just promise me you'll hold on. No more giving up." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. The sound of voices echoed faintly outside the door. Both of them froze. Ryan moved quickly to the small screen by the entrance, checking the security feed. On the grainy image, he saw the two men from earlier standing at the end of the hallway, talking in low voices. "They found us," Nira whispered, fear flashing in her eyes. Ryan's voice was calm, but firm. "They won't get in. This door's stronger than it looks." Still, he could see how frightened she was. He sat back down on the chair, close enough for her to feel less alone. "Listen to me, Nira. They can't hurt you while you're in here. I won't let them." Her eyes searched his, looking for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she took a slow breath and nodded. The heater filled the silence with its soft hum. Nira finally leaned back against the bunk, exhaustion settling into her bones. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes, trusting that she was safe. Ryan stayed awake, keeping watch. His gaze shifted between her peaceful face and the security screen. He knew the raiders wouldn't give up easily. Tomorrow they'd have to plan their next move. But for tonight, Nira could rest. As the hours passed, Ryan thought about the promise he had just made. Protecting her wouldn't be easy. The raiders were dangerous, and he had little to fight them with. Yet deep inside, he knew he couldn't turn away now. He looked at Nira again. Even in sleep, her hands still clutched the jacket he'd given her. She had been through more than most could survive, yet she still endured. A thought came to him then. Maybe helping her wasn't only about saving her. Maybe it was also about saving a part of himself, the part that still believed in doing what was right. As the first faint light of the outpost's artificial dawn began to glow through the small window, Ryan whispered quietly to himself, "You're safe now, Nira. I promise." And though she slept, a small, peaceful smile touched her lips, as if she had heard. Morning came slowly on the outpost. Artificial lights brightened one section of the market at a time until the long metal corridors glowed with pale blue light. The sound of traders setting up their stalls filled the air again, clattering boxes, shouting voices, and the sharp hiss of steam from food vendors. Ryan stood by the small window of his room, watching the busy scene below. He hadn't slept much. His eyes were tired, but his mind was clear. The raiders were still out there, and he had no doubt they would come looking for Nira again. Behind him, Nira stirred awake on the bunk. She blinked against the light and sat up slowly, pulling his jacket tighter around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked around as if unsure of where she was. Then, remembering, she let out a small breath of relief. "You stayed," she whispered softly. Ryan turned to her with a faint smile. "Of course I did." She lowered her gaze, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "I thought maybe it was just a dream, that someone helped me." "Not a dream," Ryan said. "You're safe here, at least for now." Her eyes lingered on him, as though she was trying to believe it fully. Then, after a pause, she asked quietly, "What happens now?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He pulled his pack over his shoulder and said, "First, we get food for the day. Then we figure out our next step." Nira hesitated. "The raiders, they'll be watching," Ryan admitted. "But if we act like nothing's wrong, they won't make a move in front of so many eyes." She swallowed nervously, then stood, clutching the jacket close. "Then I'll stay with you." Together, they stepped back into the market. The air was filled with the familiar mix of voices and smells. Nira walked close beside Ryan, her eyes scanning the crowd carefully. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, though most people pretended not to stare. Whispers followed them, quiet enough to hide, but still loud enough for her to hear. "Look, that's the girl. The human gave her food yesterday. No one does that here." Nira's cheeks grew warm. She kept her head low, wishing she could disappear. Ryan noticed her discomfort. Leaning down slightly, he murmured, "Ignore them. Let them talk." She glanced at him. "Doesn't it bother you that they think you're a fool?" Ryan smiled faintly. "If helping someone makes me a fool, I don't mind." Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something more, but the words caught in her throat. They stopped at a food stall where a short alien merchant sold steaming bowls of grain. The merchant eyed Nira suspiciously, but said nothing as Ryan paid with a few of his remaining coins. He handed one bowl to Nira, and they moved to a quiet corner to eat. As they sat, Nira whispered, "People are staring. Let them stare," Ryan said calmly. "We'll eat, and then we'll move on." But Nira's eyes kept darting around. That was when she saw them. Two men in dark coats stood at the edge of the market, their eyes fixed on her. They didn't hide their interest. One leaned toward the other, whispering something before they both smirked. Her heart raced. She looked quickly at Ryan. "They're here," she whispered. Ryan didn't need to ask who. He followed her gaze and saw the men. His jaw tightened. "Keep eating," he said quietly. "Don't let them see your fear." Nira tried, but her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The warm food felt heavy in her stomach, each bite harder than the last. The men didn't move closer, but their eyes never left her. Soon others in the market began to notice. Whispers grew louder. Some traders glanced between Ryan and the raiders, curious about what would happen. Finally, one bold voice spoke up from a nearby stall. "Hey, human! You feeding strays now?" The words were mocking, but they carried across the market. Several others chuckled. Nira lowered her head, her face burning. Ryan looked calmly at the man who had spoken. "I'm feeding someone who was starving. That a problem?" The man smirked. "Problem? No. But don't expect thanks. People here don't change. You'll learn soon enough." Ryan's voice stayed steady. "Maybe, but it doesn't cost me anything to try." The trader snorted and turned back to his work, muttering under his breath. Nira glanced at Ryan. "Why speak back to them? They'll only mock you more." "Because they need to hear it," Ryan replied. "And because you need to know you're not alone." Her chest tightened at his words. She turned her face away quickly, hiding the tears that threatened to rise. But the tension didn't fade. The raiders were still watching, their patience clear in their cold stares. After finishing their meal, Ryan stood. "Come on. Let's move before they decide to get bold." They walked through the market together, passing stalls filled with strange fruits, glowing minerals, and tools made from salvaged parts. Some vendors watched them with open curiosity, while others pretended not to notice. As they neared the edge of the market, an older alien woman stepped forward suddenly, blocking their path. She looked at Nira closely, then at Ryan. "She's one of the taken, isn't she?" the woman asked softly. Nira froze, her breath catching. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if she is?" The woman's gaze softened. "Then don't let them have her again. Too many have already been lost." For a moment, Nira's eyes met the woman's. There was kindness there, rare kindness in this cold place. Nira nodded. Faintly, though no words came. The woman stepped aside, letting them pass. Ryan guided Nira into a quieter corridor, leading back toward the living quarters. But even as they left the market, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. Once they were alone, Nira finally whispered, "They won't stop, Ryan. They'll come for me." Ryan stopped, looking at her with steady eyes. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Her lips parted, her voice trembling. "Why do you keep risking yourself for me?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Because you're worth it." Nira stared at him, her chest tightening with a feeling she hadn't known in a long time, hope mixed with fear. She didn't know if she could believe his promise, but a part of her wanted to. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the outpost, the raiders began to plan their next move. The narrow corridors of the outpost were quiet when Ryan and Nira returned from the market. The noise of the traders faded behind them, replaced by the steady hum of engines and the occasional hiss of air from the vents above. Nira stayed close to Ryan, her steps light and careful. She held his jacket around her shoulders as though it could protect her from everything outside. Still, her eyes kept darting behind them, checking for shadows. "They're following, aren't they?" she whispered. Ryan glanced back once, then forward again. "Not yet, but they will." Nira's stomach twisted with fear. "What if they take me again?" Ryan slowed his steps and looked at her, his eyes steady. "They won't. Not while I'm here." She wanted to believe him, but the memory of the cages, the chains, and the raiders' cruel laughter still burned in her mind. She bit her lip and stayed silent. When they reached Ryan's small room, he checked the hallway carefully before unlocking the door. Once inside, Nira sat on the bunk, her hands trembling. Ryan set down his pack and crouched in front of her. "You need to rest," he said gently. Her voice cracked. "How can I rest when they're out there?" "Because I'll keep watch," he replied. "You're safe here." She studied his face for a long moment. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm determination. Slowly, she nodded and lay down, pulling the jacket over herself. Ryan sat in the chair near the door, his eyes fixed on the small security screen. For a while, all was quiet. But just as Nira began to drift into sleep, a sharp knock rattled the metal door. Her eyes shot open. She sat up quickly, fear flashing across her face. Ryan raised a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. He stood and moved closer to the door, checking the screen. 2 men stood outside, the same raiders from the market. Their coats were dark, their faces rough with scars and hard eyes. One of them leaned close to the door and called out, "Open up, human! We need to talk!" Ryan's jaw tightened. He pressed the intercom button beside the door. "I've got nothing to say to you." The second man chuckled, his voice cold. "Maybe not, but the girl does." Nira froze, her heart pounding. Ryan kept his voice calm but firm. "She's not going anywhere with you," the first man sneered. "She's property. You don't own her." Ryan's hand curled into a fist at his side. "She's not property. She's free." There was a pause, then the sound of laughter. "Free? Nothing's free here? You think feeding her makes you her hero? You'll regret this, human." They knocked again, harder this time, making the acre shake. Nira flinched, clutching the blanket tightly around her. Ryan pressed the intercom again. "Leave before I call security," the first man growled. "Security works for us. You think they'll help you?" The second man added, his voice sharp. "We'll give you a choice. Hand her over, and we'll forget this ever happened. Resist, and we'll make sure you both disappear." Nira's breath came fast, panic rising. She looked at Ryan with wide eyes. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ryan turned to her, his expression steady. "We don't give in." The men outside banged. On the door again, their voices louder now. "Decide, human, last chance!" Ryan leaned close to Nira. "Listen to me. No matter what happens, stay behind me. Don't open this door. No matter what you hear." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded quickly. The pounding continued for several minutes, then stopped suddenly. The silence was almost worse than the noise. Ryan checked the screen again. The hallway was empty. "They're gone," Nira whispered. "Not gone," Ryan corrected. "Just waiting." He paced the small room, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here. The raiders would come back, maybe with more men, and if security truly worked for them, reporting wouldn't help. Finally, he looked at Nira. "We need a plan." She sat on the bunk, her hands still trembling. "Where can we go? This outpost, it's all I know now." "There's a transport. Leaving tomorrow," Ryan said. "I heard traders talking about it. It heads for the inner colonies, safer places. We could get on it." Her eyes widened. "But I don't have money for passage." "I'll find a way," Ryan said firmly. She looked at him, her eyes full of doubt and hope mixed together. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Ryan hesitated. He could have said many things. That it was the right thing to do, that he couldn't stand by, that she deserved better. But in the end, he simply said, "Because no one else will." Her lips trembled, and she lowered her gaze, whispering, "Thank you." That night, neither of them slept much. Ryan kept watch at the door, his ears sharp for any sound outside. Nira lay awake on the bunk, her heart heavy with fear, but warmed by the thought that she wasn't alone anymore in the day. Early hours, a noise broke the silence, the faint scrape of metal against the lock. Ryan moved instantly, grabbing the tool he kept under the desk. "They're trying to break in," he whispered. Nira's hands flew to her mouth to keep from crying out. The lock clicked once, then again. The door trembled under pressure. Ryan positioned himself between Nira and the door. "Stay back," he ordered softly. The lock sparked, then went dark. Silence followed. After a long moment, the sound of retreating footsteps echoed down the hall. Ryan exhaled slowly, his grip on the tool tightening. He turned to Nira. "They'll try again. We have to leave at dawn." She nodded quickly, her face pale but determined. And as the first faint light of the station's artificial day began to glow, Both knew the time for hiding was over. The raiders wanted her back, and they would not stop, but Ryan was ready. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The market was busier than usual that day. Traders shouted their prices louder, hoping to finish deals before nightfall. Shiny ships came and went, leaving trails of steam and metal clanks. But beneath the noise, tension buzzed like electricity. Ryan and Nira moved carefully through the crowd. Nira's eyes scanned every face, searching for danger. She clutched Ryan's hand tightly, holding on to the small comfort it gave her. "They'll come soon," Ryan whispered. "We have to be ready." Nira nodded, swallowing her fear. She trusted Ryan, even though the threat weighed heavily on her chest. They reached the center of the market where a group of traders gathered. Many stared at Nira, some with curiosity, others with cold suspicion. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the noise. "There she is, the runaway!" A tall man with a scarred face pushed through the crowd. His eyes locked on Nira. Behind him, two large men followed, blocking any chance of escape. Ryan stepped forward, placing himself between Nira and the approaching men. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. The scarred man sneered. "She belongs to us. You're just a fool trying to stop what's already decided." The crowd watched silently, the air thick with tension. Some traders whispered to each other. Others shifted nervously on their feet. Ryan's voice grew louder. "This isn't right. She's free." The scarred man laughed harshly. "Free? She's ours by law." A voice from the crowd interrupted. "What law says a person can own another?" Several heads turned toward the speaker, an older woman with silver hair and wise eyes. She stepped forward confidently. "This woman deserves to be free, too. Many have been lost to these raiders." Murmurs of agreement spread among the traders. The scarred man's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." The older woman met his gaze steadily. "No, we know enough, and we won't stand by while you take her." A few traders nodded, stepping closer to show support. The crowd began to shift, their fear giving way to courage. Ryan looked at Nira. "Stay close. Things might get worse before they get better." Nira's heart pounded, but she stood tall beside him. The scarred man snarled, "You're making a mistake." Suddenly, one of the large men moved forward, reaching for Nira's arm. Ryan reacted instantly, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it away. The large man grunted, but didn't fight back hard. The crowd gasped. Some shouted, "Stop! This isn't right!" Ryan's voice rang out clearly. "No one here should live in fear, not because of these raiders." The older woman spoke again, louder this time. "We will protect her, and anyone else they try to take." The scarred man glanced around, seeing the growing resistance. His face twisted with anger and frustration. "We'll see how long your courage lasts," he said, backing away slowly. As he and his men retreated, the market seemed to breathe easier. Traders began to talk openly again, their fear lessening. Nira looked up at Ryan, tears in her eyes. "You saved me." He shook his head gently. "We saved each other." The older woman smiled warmly at Nira. "You're safe now. We'll watch over you." Nira's voice was soft but sure. "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, hope filled her heart. The mining colony of Argon 4 was not a place many humans enjoyed. The air smelled faintly of iron, and the sky was always a pale gray, filled with drifting dust that never seemed to settle. Yet Milo had lived here long enough that it no longer bothered him. He was a technician, someone who repaired broken machines, and in a place like Argon 4 there was always something broken. That morning, Milo was halfway up a tall communications tower on the edge of the colony. The cold wind whipped at his jacket, carrying with it the faint echo of distant machinery. He tightened the last bolt, humming a tune to himself, when he noticed something unusual. There, standing on the rocky ridge not far away, was a figure. Milo frowned. Very few people came out this far. Most colonists stayed near the safety of the main settlement. He squinted, expecting to see a fellow worker, but the figure didn't look human. The cloak she wore was long and flowing, colored a shade of pale blue that almost blended with the rocks. The way she stood, still and silent, made him uneasy. "Hello?" Milo called, raising a hand. His voice carried through the thin air. The figure tilted her head, but said nothing. Milo finished tightening the bolt, climbed down carefully, and brushed the dust from his gloves. By the time he reached the bottom, the figure was closer. Now he could see her face. She wasn't human. Her skin was a smooth silver gray, faintly shimmering under the dim light. Her eyes were large, with pupils shaped like diamonds, glowing faintly teal. She looked young, though Milo had no idea how to guess her age. Her cloak covered most of her form, but he could tell she was thin, delicate in a way. Milo froze for a moment. The Liven. He had heard of them, though rarely did they appear near human colonies. The Liven were known to be cautious and avoided direct contact with humans unless necessary. Some said their hearing was so sharp they could detect a whisper from 100 paces. Others said loud noises could harm them. The girl seemed just as surprised to see him. Her gaze darted to the small device clipped to his belt, then back to his face. "You are human?" she asked softly, her voice like the brush of wind through tall grass. "Yes," Milo replied carefully. "My name's Milo. I'm just fixing the tower. I didn't know anyone was nearby." She hesitated, then stepped closer, though her eyes kept flicking toward the device at his waist. "That sound," she said quietly. "What was it?" Milo blinked, confused. Then he realized he had been humming. "You mean the noise I was making?" Her head tilted again. "It was unusual. Sharp, but not unpleasant. My ears felt strange." Milo chuckled nervously. "That's just me humming a tune. A kind of music." "Music," she repeated, tasting the word carefully, as though it were new to her. Milo nodded. "Humans make music. It's, well, hard to explain. It's like shaping sound into patterns. Some music is soft and calming, some is loud and full of energy." The girl's diamond-shaped pupils widened slightly. Loud. That would hurt. He remembered the stories, how the Liven avoided human gatherings because of music, believing it dangerous. He didn't want to frighten her, so he kept his tone gentle. "It doesn't have to hurt. It can bring joy too. It depends on the kind." She lowered her hood slowly, revealing hair that shimmered faintly like threads of liquid silver. Her expression was cautious, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "I have never heard human music before," she admitted. "Our elders forbid it. They say your sounds are too strong. They say our ears are not meant for such things." Milo leaned against the base of the tower, choosing his words carefully. "Do you believe that?" Her gaze fell to the ground and she whispered, "I don't know." Then more firmly, "What you made, I want to hear it again." Milo blinked. That was unexpected. "You mean my humming?" "Yes, please." He smiled faintly and began to hum the same tune again, a simple melody his mother used to sing to him when he was younger. At first, the alien girl flinched, as though bracing herself for pain. But after a few moments, her shoulders relaxed. She closed her eyes, listening, her expression softening. When he finished, she let out a slow breath. "It is not as I was told. It feels like the air itself is moving with meaning." "That's one way to describe music," Milo said with a small grin. The girl stepped closer now, her cloak brushing the ground. "Can you show me more?" Milo hesitated. He carried an old Earth device in his pack, a small player filled with songs he kept for the long, quiet nights. He had always enjoyed music, even if most of the colonists preferred silence. But if the stories about the Liven were true, playing it for her might overwhelm her. Still, the spark in her eyes reminded him of a child discovering something wonderful for the first time. "All right," he said softly. He pulled the small device from his pack, its surface scratched from years of use. Her gaze locked onto it immediately, and she stepped even closer, her breath quickening. "What is it?" she whispered. "It's called a music player," Milo explained. "It holds songs, recordings of human music." She looked uncertain. "Is it dangerous?" Milo shook his head. "Not if we choose carefully. I can play something gentle just so you can hear." The girl hesitated, then nodded, her silver hair catching the faint light. "My name is Arya," she said softly. Milo smiled. "Nice to meet you, Arya." He tapped the screen, and the device lit up. The soft glow reflected in her curious eyes. He scrolled through his collection, skipping past the louder tracks, and chose a calm, acoustic song. As the gentle strumming of a guitar filled the air, Arya stiffened. Her ears twitched slightly as though adjusting to the sound. Milo kept the volume low, watching carefully for any sign of discomfort. But instead of pulling away, Arya leaned forward. Her lips parted slightly, and a faint shiver ran through her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Milo's chest tightened with relief. "I'm glad you like it." Arya's diamond pupils sparkled as she listened. The notes seemed to paint invisible colors in the air around her. When the song ended, she opened her eyes slowly as if waking from a dream. She struggled to find words. "Like hearing the stars breathe." Milo chuckled softly. "That's one of my favorites. There are many more." Arya glanced around nervously as though afraid someone might see. Then she whispered, "Show me another." "Please." Milo hesitated only a moment before nodding. "All right, but this one's a little stronger." She straightened her shoulders, determination flashing in her eyes. "I am ready." Milo scrolled again, his finger pausing over a playlist he hadn't touched in months. It was labeled hard, rock. He almost chose something softer again, but Arya's expression told him she wanted more. So he tapped it, and the first heavy chord filled the air. Arya gasped, her hands rising toward her ears. Milo reached to stop the song, his heart racing, but then he froze. Because Arya wasn't in pain. Her eyes were wide, her breath quick, and her entire body trembled, not with fear, but with something else entirely. "It feels," she whispered, voice shaking, "like thunder in my veins."